Good morning. Welcome to the Elliott Church. I know we have announcements, so if anyone who has an announcement would like to come up to the old lectern, please do. Rosemary.
Good morning. I just wanted to remind everybody that next Sunday is our annual meeting, and I just point out, as the sort of pure democracy that we are, that you who come to the annual meeting as members, this is your opportunity to be updated, but also importantly vote on the budget for the next year. So it's a critical meeting. You certainly can attend remotely if necessary, and I would hope that you might just, I think we can make the chat work function so that if we have votes, you can vote remotely even, so you can do that if necessary. We do have copies of the annual report in the back, and I would encourage you to pick one up and take it home, but remember that this is your copy because we didn't make like 150 copies, so take it home, look at it, bring it back next Sunday, and it's also available online, so you can check that out as well. So it's next Sunday immediately after the service. Thanks.
Are there any other announcements? Okay. I will direct you just really quickly by way of just directing. In the announcements, you'll see one other announcement, which is the winter weekend getaway. This year in March, every year around this time on Facebook, I get, those, some algorithm sends you like old pictures. They're like, your memories, whatever. And every year I get the same picture of, actually it's me and Rich, hanging out in a kitchen in Waterville Valley. Because this was, for many years, the ski weekend. We would go this weekend and get our reports and then have our annual meeting the next week. And I remember thinking back then, what a great sort of relaxing, Sabbathy sort of thing that was. Purely coincidentally, lets you think I'm a genius. This week, we're talking about Sabbath. About how we spend time here in this church and elsewhere observing things that are, less workaday and mundane than a lot of the things that take up our time. So let us take a moment in silence to think about Sabbaths, think about where we find them and how we find them. Steve comes down for our hymn, please do turn, but this is not the red hymnal, Pilgrim hymnal, it's in the gray hymnal, hymn number 34, Though I May Speak with Bravest Flag. That's this one. our coming. In the love of truth and in the spirit of Jesus, we unite for the worship of God and the service of all. Sigurd Olsen, and I thought this might involve a little bit of explaining. Sigurd Olsen was a conservationist, environmentalist in the 20th century, professional wilderness guide, but also a writer and teacher. This might be relevant for some of you. He was a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And this comes from his book, Listening Point, which is about his efforts to build what we in the Northeast call camp. Other places refer to it as a hunting cabin frequently. And Listening Point, his camp, was built by the end of the book and is now owned by the Listening Point Foundation. And it's used, I think, mostly now as a writer's retreat. But here's something from Sigurd Olsen. Listening Point is a bare, glaciated spit of rock in the Quetico Superior country. Each time I have gone there, I have found something new which has opened up great realms of thought and interest. For me, it has been a point of discovery and, like all such places of departure, has assumed meaning far beyond the ordinary. From it, I have seen the immensity of space and glimpsed at times the grandeur of creation. There I have sensed the span of uncounted centuries and looked down the path all life has come. I've explored on this rocky bit of shore the great concept that nothing stands alone and everything, no matter how small, is part of the greater whole. From this one place, I would explore the entire North and all life, including my own. I could look to the stars and feel that here was a focal point of great celestial triangles, a point as important as any on the planet. For me, it would be a listening post from which I might even hear the music of the sphere. I named this place Listening Point because only when one comes to listen, only when one is aware and still can things be seen and heard. Everyone has a listening point somewhere. It doesn't have to be in the north or close to the wilderness, but some place of quiet where the universe can be contemplated with awe.
So this reading is from In Her Own Right, Constructing Feminist Liturgical Tradition by the theologian Marjorie Proctor-Smith. This book is influential in many ways, but today we are focusing on her definition of liturgy, which are the ritualized steps and movements of worship, including not just things like communion, but prayers, readings, collection, hymns, and sermons as well. In her poem, The Images, Adrienne Rich laments the power of humanly created forms, such as language, music, and art, to disguise and to mystify oppression, to reorganize victimization, translating violence into patterns so powerful and pure, we continuously fail to ask, are they true for us? It is this fundamental truth question which motivates this beginning dialogue between feminist theology and liturgical theology. Liturgy is certainly a humanly created form that is both powerful and pure. It is the result of a many-century process of encounter between God and human communities gathered together, again and again, in a particular but ever-changing historical context. Because liturgy is the evidence of this living process, it makes claims of truth. To be precise, the liturgy claims that When its work is being done, participants are engaging in a dialogue with God. The claim of encounter with God gives the liturgical event its power and its truth. Liturgical truth, then, is not at all an abstract or purely intellectual truth, but an engaged, embodied, and particular truth, a truth that cannot only be talked about, but must be done.
Let's take a moment in silent prayer to pray for those in need of our prayers today. In particular, many of us are thinking of the victims of police violence. Does the world need a Sabbath? Can we step back for a reboot? Shake off the crust and dry cast of our excess. The ritual building up of grim and grimy armor day after day, generation after generation, precluding the work of graceful concert. Can we flex our muscles, swing our arms and legs, feel the accretions fall away, breathe in the air and the spirit, and see each other with no mist between us? What can we do on a 0 day? Children of God, adults of God, on a break from being ourselves, just holding peace. as Jesus taught us, let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Now it is time for the offering, a free gift to a free church.
A reading from Genesis, chapters 1 and 2, but not the whole thing. God blessed them and said, "Bear fruit, increase your numbers and fill the earth, and be responsible for it. Watch over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and all the living things on the earth." God then told them, "Look, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the earth, and every tree whose fruit carries its seed inside itself. They will be your food. And to all the animals of the earth, and the birds of the air, and things that crawl on the ground, everything that has a living soul in it, I give all the green plants for food." So it was. God looked at all of this creation and proclaimed that it was good, very good. Evening came, and morning followed the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth and all their array were completed. On the seventh day God had finished all the work of creation, and so on that seventh day God rested. God blessed the seventh day and called it sacred, because on it God rested from all the work of creation.
This is responsive reading 608 from your gray hymnal. This clay jug. Inside this clay jug, there are canyons and pine mountains, and the maker of canyons and pine mountains.
All 7 oceans are inside, and hundreds of millions of stars.
The acid that tests gold is there, and the one who judges jewels.
And the music from the strings no one touches, and the source of all water.
If you want the truth, I will tell you the truth.
Friend, listen. The God whom I love is inside.
Please turn to number 391 in your hymnal. Steve, can you refresh my memory? How many verses are there of this?
There's one.
One. Yeah, so let's see. So yeah, please turn your voice still and small. Written by my intern supervisor, John Carrado. Let's see what it does. Please rise. So on the seventh day, God had finished the work of creation. And so, on the seventh day, God rested. On the seventh day, God rested. This is an iconic passage about the Sabbath day, obviously, at least in the Bible, and it's right there at the beginning. But I want to take a moment to think about the economy and about the change in how many of us work. So it feels like it's been a little over a year since some employers started leaning into the whole back to the office thing, while also attempting to seize the higher ground in the era of the Great Resignation. When I say Great Resignation, do you all know what I mean? Good. If you don't, look it up. I don't have time this morning to explain. But essentially, these folks, these corporations, these employers are attempting to push us all back into the previous way of doing things. In spite of the inconclusive evidence around whether working from the office is more productive than working from home. And in spite of greater evidence that low wages and poor working conditions have more to do with the shrinking workforce than the laziness of the American worker. Now, there are, of course, a segment of workers who have to go to the office, and there's a bunch who enjoy the office. And it should also be noted that a large number of employers have not made draconian measures in this department. Some have even attracted workers to them by offering better wages, health insurance, and flexible schedules with flexible locations. Now, some of the great resigners now have returned to work, and some have not. Those ones are waiting and searching for something that better suits them. However, what this pushback to the call to return, what this pushback to the call to return to the 9-to-5 office commute indicates for us today, we're talking about the seventh day, talking about Sabbath, is that something larger is happening in our society. No one would expect such a call from corporate America to be necessary, even a few years ago. Those studies indicate that this shift in priorities actually predates the pandemic and was just accelerated by it, much like other crises that we are familiar with, like the crisis of the declining model of the 20th century church. You see, we as a species have been in the process of rewiring ourselves just a little bit, drifting away from the previous programming of a century or so of modern capitalism. In the midst of the chaos and fear of illness that we experienced since 2020, we were forced to alter priorities quickly. We privileged health, wellness, family and friends over careers. We learned to stay home when we were not feeling well, rather than soldiering on like we used to and making other people sick in the process. Every day, every single day, for years now, we have had to closely examine our values when we leave the house. And in essence, we learned in that process to take Sabbath seriously. To take Sabbath seriously. We learned that rest, our rest, is something we do for others as well as for ourselves. Now, up until the pandemic, many of us didn't really think too hard about achieving work-life balance. I mean, we would talk a good self-care game. But even today, in the midst of this global adjustment, most of us here still work too hard, study too hard. We tend to skip days off and time with family because we feel that pressure from both outside and inside ourselves to do our part in a culture driven by economic concerns. Now at least we know, because we've had to practice it, that there is a different way. There's a different way. Our doctors, by the way, have always told us, while frequently working themselves too hard, have always told us that this stress-filled competition for approval is destroying our health and the health of other living things. But maybe now we will listen a little more closely. Maybe now we will take Sabbath seriously, make a practice of it, finding the time, the ritual, the attitude, and the place where we can let go and not worry about the negative voices and the possible judgment of the societal waters we swim in. So we can reflect and be mindful. So we can remember, as our reading from Genesis implies, so that we can remember that whether we believe in God or not, the ancients in their wisdom believed that God takes a Sabbath, that God rests too. So how do we do this? It's always the question. How do we do this? Last week we read the passage from the Gospel of Luke about considering. Many of you were there. Don't worry about your life and what you are to eat, but consider the flowers. This process is part of what will save us. This process of considering, of finding a way to break out of this cycle of modern life that makes mindfulness so hard. And it is indeed a process. It is indeed a practice that we see most clearly through worship. Through worship, including in this space where we can engage in sacred rituals and liturgy. Liturgical truth, says Marjorie Proctor-Smith, is not at all an abstract or purely intellectual truth, but an engaged, embodied, and particular truth. A truth that cannot only be talked about, but must be done. A truth that must be done. Done in this sense, meaning acted out through the steps of our service to start. The hymns, the prayers, sometimes communion, readings, responsive readings, and sermons performed not just by clergy, but by the assembled congregation. We may understand this aspect of Sabbath a bit more clearly this sabbatical year as we increase lay participation here. Through readings, lay-led services in a box, and a commitment to shepherd those guest preachers through what is probably for them a similar but still unique worship process or liturgy. Now, some of you may have seen that article that crops up on Facebook from time to time that says people who attend worship on the Sabbath tend to be happier than other people. I've enjoyed that a great deal. That's something else my algorithm gives. It's not just pictures of Rich. It's sometimes other things. Now, of course, we do not know if church or other houses of worship actually make people happy, or if happy people just like attending church and houses of worship more than others, but it is an interesting, fun fact. And of course, as we have been talking about in our Sabbath Walk workshops, we know that worship doesn't just happen between these walls. It may start here, but it goes other places too. Worship can happen anywhere with the right approach and the right attitude, the right state of mind. And we just have to find a way to turn off that other voice, that get back in the office voice, that work without compensation on your vacation voice, so we can turn our attention elsewhere and hear the still, small voice of our hymn today. fact, our own tradition has things to say about this too. One of the oldest ways to create apparently unproductive, but in fact restorative downtime is to continue Sabbath from this hour here in traditional morning worship so that it stretches into the rest of the day. Returning home to put mundane tasks aside there as well, letting dishes pile up in the sink and the lawn grow a little bit longer, and perhaps most importantly, leaving those emails right where we left them the day before. Now I realize that even for church people, this sounds a bit old-fashioned, but I bet it sounds appealing too. Either way, worship in a house of worship is a good place to start a Sabbath practice, because we know that at least sometimes we can do that. We can make it here. Then what we need to do, wherever we are, is find ways to mark the time. To mark the time. And to do so much more effectively than we do now. We need to note how we are feeling and what is going on in the world. And not just what's going on in the news, but the weather, in the seasons of our lives, in the people around us, and in the wildness of life as well. The fact is, we can also create our own sacred spaces away from this space that can sometimes be shared with others, as we do when we climb Pegan Hill on the solstice. Or we can create spaces that are unique to us, all of them to minister to our Sabbath needs. Now, in our reading from Sigurd Olsen today, he talks about building his camp, his hunting cabin, at a place he called Listening Point. From it, I have seen the immensity of space and glimpsed at times the grandeur of creation, he says. There I have sensed the span of uncounted centuries and looked down the path all life has come. He wrote these words in the late 1950s in response to what he saw as overly regimented post-war society. And certainly what is described is the effect wilderness that has on many of us. We talk about that a great deal in this church. But there is that other word, wildness, too. There is a way in which we can touch wildness in other places as well. Is it easy? Sometimes, if we're mindful about it, if we think about it. Because it does mean stepping out of our usual orbits. It means doing something different with our time than we usually do, and experiencing that less domesticated part of other people and of ourselves. But that experience can actually happen anywhere where we are able to reflect. And we are able to reflect on the reality of our lives. Now, it may be worth noting that while Olsen was a professional guide and adventurer, his camp was accessible thanks to a road that he had built. Only when one is aware and still, he writes, can things be seen and heard. Everyone, he says, everyone has a listening point somewhere. It does not have to be in the north or close to wilderness, but someplace quiet where the universe can be contemplated with awe. Someplace quiet where the universe can be contemplated with awe. That is what the Sabbath is. Whether it is a Sabbath walk or something else, it is finding our listening point and then staying there long enough to listen. Because it turns out, this clay jug of a planet, as the Indian mystic Kabir Das calls it, contains the divine. This clay jug contains the divine. So let's take a moment now to think on this, and to consider where and how we may make sacred space in the midst of the mundane, and how we rest, how we take our Sabbath within it. Blessed be. Now please join in our final hymn, hymn number 131 in your gray hymnal, Love Will Guide Us. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth, that you are not alone. Amen, and blessed be.